Christine Lagarde, as you know, the IMF managing director, has come out today and she has said the world economy would be worse off, without negative interest rates. I knew you'd laugh. And she admitted she was being counterfactual. I suppose your laugh tells me what you think of that comment.
Look, I believe that the interventionists with fiscal policies and with monetary policies, in other words, the so-called neo-Keynesian or new Keynesian, that is their excuse. They will always say, if we hadn't done this and hadn't done that, it would be much worse. They have no proof for this assertion. In my view, it would have been better to let the crisis, already the first one in 2000, run its course and prevent the colossal credit bubble that was built up that then led to an even bigger crisis. And now they're doing the same mistake. They're again adding to credit volumes in the world. Credit as a percent of the global economy is up very strongly since 2007. In particular, of course, in China, but also in other countries. And we distinguish between productive credit and unproductive credit. Productive credit is to build a factory with credit and then hire people and acquire machinery and then produce something, either services or goods. But most of the credit is now for transfer payments, and that is very negative for long-term structural economic growth, because it allows actually the government to become bigger and bigger and bigger and to have more regulation. And I can tell you, I'm in the financial sector, and I talk to people in the financial sector. Half their time is nowadays consumed with filling out forms by regulators.
Mark, how are they going to fight then the next crisis? I mean, your prescription would have been more fiscal policy. That should have played a more active role. Will we see more publicly funded infrastructure when and if the next crisis hits?
Yes, that's a very good question, because the magicians at central banks, they always come out with a new trick. And these negative interest rates that we have today, this is for the first time in recorded human history, from the times of Babylon up to today, that we have negative interest rates. And it's not going to end well, that I can tell you. But the sequence of how it will not end well, I'm not so sure. But they still have a lot of ammunition. What they can do is helicopter money. In other words, they can send you and Mr. Bloomberg and me and everybody, say, a check for $10,000. And that is like throwing gasoline into a fire. For a while, the fire will glow and expand. And then afterwards, it will again go down. And then you need another doses of helicopter money. So the next time around, they can send out checks for $20,000 to everybody. And this will be a very popular measure, because everybody will get the $20,000. For the rich, it won't mean anything, $20,000 more or less. But say for the poor people and for the lower middle class, to get $20,000 a piece will be very desirable. So they can do a lot of things if they want to. But will it help the economy? That is the question. It won't help in the long run. You cannot grow an economy by just throwing money at people.
What should they be doing? What policies would you want to be enacted, Mr. Faber?
I want to tell you, the less policies, the better it would be. We all learned at school that the free market and the capitalistic system is the best allocator of resources. And now what we have is the worst allocation of resources, because it's the government that tells you how these resources are allocated, and they continuously expand their interventions. And I can tell you, I started to work in 1970. In the 70s and early 1980s, central banks actually never came up in discussions. They have now become like the messiah, and everybody watches what the central banks do, and in the end, in my view, they will have from a long-term perspective, no impact whatsoever. Now, can they move markets short-term? Yes, but maybe not in the direction they want to.
You talk about allocating resources, Mr. Faber. Allocate my resources for me right now, because I'm looking at the picks that you have, and you're saying get into the dogs of the world, of course, your usual pun. Brazil. You're saying get into Brazil, get into Russia. How are you going to convince me amid such political turmoil there?
Well, you see these emerging markets like Brazil and Russia, of course they are in recession, whereby Russia is doing better than Brazil, but the valuations have come down very substantially. And if you ask me, Mark, where should I allocate my funds today? In the US stock market, which is essentially very highly priced by any measure, price to sales, price to earnings, and so forth, market cap to GDP, the US market doesn't come out favorably. Now, the emerging markets, they have corrected significantly, some since 2006 and some since 2011. And I would say they are relatively attractive. So if I had to invest money today, and I'm investing all the time money because I have a cash flow, I invest in emerging economies. You can buy the Singapore stock market with a 4% dividend yield. Well, Singapore is a relatively sound economy. It's diversified and it's well run, unlike the US. Unless, of course, the US is run by Mr. Trump. Then the US will improve.
Are you really a fan of Mr. Trump, Mark? Do you really believe...
It's all relative. Given the alternatives, I would vote for Mr. Trump, because
Why?
he may only destroy the US economy, but Hillary Clinton will destroy the whole world. That's
Why
the
will
difference.
Why will Hillary Clinton destroy the whole world? What's the evidence?
Look at her nation building in the Middle East, how successful that has been.
But Mr. Faber, I mean, we're seeing from Donald Trump's potential policies that he wants to slow international trade between the United States and other countries. Surely that's going to be a block upon free markets.
Well, I agree that it is negative if you have restrictions on a free market. That I agree entirely. But you have to equally see that the US has essentially given in on a lot of things that benefit other countries. If you look at, say, the growth, 2000 to today, which countries have done relatively well? The emerging markets have done fantastically well. Their GDP has gone up substantially. The standards of living have gone up substantially. They have accumulated large reserves and so forth. The US and Europe and Japan, relatively speaking, have been declining, and that these statistics are visible from industrial production in emerging economies. It's doubled in the last 12 years. Global trade, you look at the share of emerging markets, it's gone up. The developed world, the US, Europe, Japan, it's gone down, and so forth and so on. So I think that maybe we have to find a way to have a more balanced approach to global trade. I'm not saying protectionism, but a more balanced approach that is fairer to the developed world.
Give me another call for me, Mr. Faber. You are saying at the moment that you like long-term US treasuries, but the consensus is for yields to rise. What do you feel is the beneficial trade there in terms of, you're saying, relatively speaking, get into long-term US debt? Why?
Yes, actually, I still hold US treasuries. They did very well until about 2 weeks ago, and since then they sold off. I've sold some trading positions, but I'm looking back to buy some of them, because I believe that eventually Mrs. Yellen will also introduce negative interest rates. Don't forget, in 2009, she said publicly, if it were possible to introduce negative interest rates, I would be voting for that. So I believe there is a chance that in the US they'll do the same as elsewhere, as in Japan, and as in Europe,